What is going on, everyone? John Kelly here. We are back with another UFC fight card, UFC Vegas 4. Not getting very creative with these names, but that's okay because this is actually a pretty decent card. I don't know if I'm more excited about it than I was last week, but obviously last week with the whole Rashkov thing didn't end up going my way, so I take the big L on that. But we're going back here. I took basically a full day to recover, to get my mind right. You know, one of my worst reads on any fights ever since I've been doing this. So it hit me pretty hard, but we're back, and I actually think we kind of uncovered a couple gems for this slate. So I'm excited to talk about it, and excited for the slate on Saturday. So and it starts early. I think it's a 4 o'clock slate, and I like that because, you know, the older I get, I'm 29, I turned 30 this year. The closer I get to 30, you know, I start to enjoy my sleep a little bit more. So I like the earlier lock time on DraftKings. It's nice to not have to be up until like 2 a.m. like we used to years ago for the pay-per-view cards and stuff. But we'll get right into it right after this sweet intro.
This is the Fight Numbers Podcast with your host, John Kelly.
All right. So the other thing that I forgot to mention was basically Miranda Maverick. I'm focused on golf. I said Maverick McNeely. Miranda Maverick actually just pulled out of her fight against Romero Barella and about 45 minutes ago. So they're searching for a replacement, a short notice replacement for Mara Romero Barella for Saturday. So it'll be basically like a 2-day notice for that person. So hopefully they'll be able to find somebody, but if not, we might be down to 10 fights here. So I'll mention that again when we get to that fight. But first fight up on the card is going to be Hansen versus Frey. And you'll notice a trend here with the UFC putting on so many cards and needing so many fighters, and mostly fighters based in the United States. They're short. So you're seeing these fighters being signed. You know, we saw a couple debuts last week, and pretty much every one of these COVID cards, we've seen short notice replacements from people just getting signed immediately. So this week, basically they went out and signed a bunch of Invicta female fighters, and a couple that I actually think are pretty good, and that can make some noise in their divisions. But it's just something that's interesting. I think we'll see more of that moving forward. Is a lot of these fighters that are fighting, you know, whether it's LFA, Invicta, all these other promotions. I think now's as good a time as ever for those fighters to get a shot at the UFC. So the first fight up on the card is going to be Hansen, Frey. They're both from Invicta. Hansen comes in as a small favorite. Let's see what it's at here. Pulling up best fight odds, minus 170. So this has actually been steamed. She was minus 130 when I looked the other day. So yeah, on Monday, and now it looks like minus 165, minus 170, depending on the book. But I definitely lean that way myself. I don't know about that price. I definitely liked it more at minus 130. But in any event, this fight is minus 280 to go to decision. And Hansen's coming in on a 2-fight win streak, most recently winning a decision back in March. Frey is coming off a decision win over Ashley Cummins back in February. And both of these, you know, I mentioned they come from Invicta, but both of them have very different fighting styles. Frey more of a striker, Muay Thai base, and Hansen's definitely more of a wrestler. And while this fight plays out on the feet, I definitely lean towards Frey. I think she should have a speed advantage. She's the better striker, the more technical striker. And Hansen just doesn't really have much on the feet. You know, she's usually just striking to get close and initiate her grappling, initiate the clinch. And I sort of, in my breakdown, I couldn't help but make the comparison that this reminds me a lot of the Jillian Robertson Courtney Casey fight from last week, in that, you know, we have one who, Casey being a good striker, has an advantage on the feet, but Robertson has a really big advantage wrestling, and once she gets it to the mat, which I expected her to, I kind of figured that it was going to play out like that, and that's sort of how I see this one. Hansen's a lot bigger. Frey previously fought at atom weight, and and she's not very comfortable off her back. So I think Hansen's going to have a lot of control time here. Hansen's also a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She's a much better submission grappler. Frey's only a blue belt. So like I said, I just think this is going to play out really, really similar to how that Robertson-Casey fight played out. So for that reason, I'm on Hansen. Hansen by decision is the official pick in that one. And I actually like that bet. You know, you can find, unless it moved, you can find her decision prop. It was at plus 150 for Hansen. Hansen wins by decision. Yeah, plus 150 still on 5 dimes. So depending on your book, I like that prop for Kay Hansen to win decision. Next fight up's going to be Jordan Griffin versus Youssef Zalil. And for those that don't remember, Youssef Zalil basically was making his debut against another debut fighter, Austin Lingo, back in February, UFC 247. He looked pretty dominant, won a unanimous decision. I was actually pretty heavy on Austin Lingo there, and Zalil just really impressed me. But Jordan Griffin, he opened as a slight favorite, and basically it moved to a pick'em the other day, and now the line's flipped. So a lot of people are sort of hyping up Youssef Zalil, and that really kind of worries me. Jordan Griffin coming off the second round submission victory over TJ Brown back in February. But, it just worries me in the sense that I could see this fight being competitive. Both fighters are good submission grapplers. I think we see some exciting scrambles on the mat, but I do think Zalil is just being a little bit overvalued just based on how good he looked in his debut against Austin Lingo. And this is just a really different matchup. Lingo, if you go back and watch the fight, like Lingo's more, he was very, it was very clear what he wanted to do. He just wanted to stand there and box. He wanted to get inside and just wing heavy punches. Like Jordan Griffin's not that type of a fighter. This is going to be a very different fight. Griffin has more experience. I would give him the edge in the grappling department. He holds a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and obviously he was able to hold his own against Dan Ige and Chaz Skelly. So I definitely think he's the better submission grappler. I think he's the better defensive grappler as well, and that's going to be a factor here because like I said, they both are comfortable on the mat and want to take it to the mat. So if I think the fight's going to play out on the mat, I lean Jordan Griffin. And on the feet is where I think it could be pretty interesting and pretty close. Neither guy is super technical. Griffin's more of a counter striker. Zalil, he likes to dance around the octagon and try to land those quick strikes, flying knees, stuff like that. I give the speed advantage to Youssef Zalil for sure, but that's basically it. I can kind of see him having problems if he tries to use that same game plan against Griffin, just because, like I said, Griffin's just such a much different fighter. Whereas Austin Lingo was just trying to press forward, so it benefited Zalil to be moving around like that. Griffin is really not that type of a fighter. I mentioned he's more of a counter striker. He doesn't really move forward, definitely not as aggressively as Austin Lingo does, and that's why I could kind of see this one, especially early on in the first round, kind of starting off slow. And that's where it really just depends when in terms of DraftKings. I think the winner should score well because I do think we're going to see a lot of grappling exchanges, but I think there is some risk here in that if it does primarily play out on the feet, I think it could be a lower volume affair, and in that aspect, we wouldn't really want the winner. But you are getting some odds value on Zalil. He's only 8K, and like I said, he's a small favorite on most books now. So I think he's going to be pretty popular, though. I think you get some extra leverage on Griffin. My money's on Griffin. I just think he has more advantages in this matchup. And if we do get the grappling exchanges that I'm expecting, and maybe even a submission victory on either side, it should be a solid fight to target in the mid-range. But like I said, just a little bit of risk in case we don't get as much grappling as I think we will. But I definitely lean Griffin. Griffin by submission is the official pick in that one. I think Zalil could just kind of get caught. Griffin has a really nice guillotine, finished TJ Brown from side control guillotine, which is really difficult to do for those that know anything about submission chokes and grappling. But yeah, so I lean Griffin. I know that's not going to be a popular pick because a lot of people are backing the young gun in Youssef Zalil, but I'm on the other side. Give me Jordan Griffin by submission. And before we move on to the third fight, I'm just going to pull up DraftKings. I think, Griffin's 8,200. So in his win, he didn't actually score all that great. He got a second round sub and only scored 78 points. But it's really just because he didn't do anything the first round. He just let TJ Brown take him down repeatedly. You see only the 15 significant strikes. He's not really a high volume guy as it is. So that's why, like I said, there's risk here. If we don't get a finish, or if we don't get a lot of takedowns, advances, submission attempts, there is some risk here regardless of who wins. So there is some concern. I still like Griffin. I think more than likely we do see a finish here, just based on both fighters' history and the specific matchup. But should be a fun one. I'm excited for it. And now we can move on. Next fight up is going to be Takashi Sato versus Ramiz Brahimaj. And I'm probably butchering his name, but that's okay. Takashi Sato comes in as a small favorite here, minus 130. The comeback on Brahimaj is plus 110. And I actually really, really like Ramiz Brahimaj. And I know money's been coming in on him. He opened at plus 145, now down to plus 110. I'm going to be betting the submission prop. I haven't done it yet. Plus 245 here. It was 260 on FanDuel when I checked earlier. Hopefully that number's still out there, but I would bet it at anything over 2-1 on my money, because I feel pretty strongly about that. And I am going to spend a little bit of time on this because, we just had the Max Roshkov thing where, we have a fighter making his debut, high-level grappler, finishes most of his wins by submission and usually early, and now going up against a guy who's had multiple UFC fights. And we saw what happened with him, but I'm not going to rethink my process just because one guy just didn't play out the way I thought and just wasn't ready for the moment. So I'm trusting the process here. Shout out to the Sixers. With Brahimaj, in a sense. Sato's coming off a submission loss to Belal Muhammad his last time out last September. His last 6 wins have all come by knockout, so he does have a little bit of upside, but his last 2 losses have come by submission. So it's clear that he wants to keep this fight on the feet. He's a decent striker. He has legitimate power. I mentioned the knockouts he has. He is a black belt in judo, but he hasn't really used it a ton. His opponent, Brahimaj, is a world champion grappler, has won all 8 of his professional wins by way of submission. He's an aggressive grappler, has one of the best guillotine chokes that I've ever seen, and that's pretty high praise. But he holds a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's basically just a classic power puncher versus high-level grappler matchup, and I'm going with the grappler in this one. I don't always do that, depending on the situation, but I am leaning with the grappler for sure. I think Sato has a problem giving up his back. We've seen it in a couple of his fights, and if he does that against Brahimaj, then I don't think this fight will last long. And like I said earlier, I fully understand if you don't want to trust me in that I was basically all in on Max Roshkov, high-level grappler, confident, played him all on DraftKings, and obviously bet him as well, and told pretty much all my friends to bet him. So it was just a total facepalm moment for me. But this is a totally different situation. Every fighter's different. Every matchup is different. And I really feel strongly about Brahimaj by sub. So give me Brahimaj by submission. That's the official pick. And I'll be betting that as well. Like I said, you can get it at 2.5-1 on FanDuel. Ryan Hodge, thank you for the subscription. I really appreciate that, buddy. And I'm not sure if Ryan Hodge is still doing the Twitch streams for football and stuff, but make sure you guys go follow him. I know last season in NFL, he did some Twitch streams that were really good for NFL DFS. All right, next fight up on the card is going to be Sean Woodson versus Juliana Rosa. Basically, as soon as this was originally going to be Kyle Nelson, and as soon as I finished breaking down that fight, it was literally within like 5 minutes, they announced Kyle Nelson pulled out. So I was like, oh. So I had to go back, grind some more tape, redo the whole write-up, but it didn't really change that much. Woodson's obviously a big favorite here, minus 400 favorite. The comeback on Julian Rosa is plus 330, and some books don't even have that line out yet. but I think it'll be pretty similar. Woodson's coming in off his impressive UFC debut against Kyle Bochniak last October. He looked really dominant in the striking department in that one. He's very tall for this division. He will have a 4-inch reach advantage against Julian Rosa. Rosa's coming off a knockout loss to Julio Arce in May of last year. He's 0-4 in the UFC and has been knocked out in 3 of those bouts. So, obviously, I think a lot of people are going to be expecting a knockout by Sean Woodson here. He was, I think, 43-3 as an amateur boxer, and you see the striking. He's very flowy. Kind of reminds me of Luis Pena in a way. I would say he's a better boxer, but how they both have that flow as they're striking, it's definitely something to watch. I really enjoy watching high-level strikers like that, and I do think Sean Woodson has some high-level striking skills. So I think he's the rightful favorite. I just think laying 4-1 in any matchup is a bit much, considering the lack of experience that Woodson has. He only has 1 fight in the UFC. I think he only has 7 fights professionally. I still think Woodson by decision is the most likely scenario. He's definitely in the mix on DraftKings. I think he's 8.8K. So, and he scored well, even in a decision, just because he landed so many strikes, scored 86 in a decision against Kyle Bochniak. I could see a similar result here, but I think the knockout upside is more, is definitely there more than it was against Bochniak, just because Rosa has been knocked out so many times. So I do like Sean Woodson here. I'm not sure how popular he's going to be. I haven't run my ownership projections yet, but if he's going to be kind of the forgotten guy in that range, with Mike Perry right above him, Luis Pena, those guys always garner ownership, and then Dustin Poirier right below him, then I'm going to have a decent amount of Woodson here. And for those that don't know, before we move on, Sean Woodson is the Tayshaun Prince of the UFC. Google Sean Woodson and you'll get a laugh for any NBA guys out there. Tayshaun Prince, Sean Woodson, put them side by side. You might not be able to tell the difference. All right, next fight up is going to be Miranda Maverick versus Mara Romero Barella. And as I mentioned before, Maverick actually just pulled out about an hour ago. So this fight is scrapped. They're searching for a replacement for Barella. And they've actually been really good at finding short notice replacements the last couple cards. It is annoying, but at least they have been getting replacements. So I can't complain. So more to come on that. Right now, we don't have anything. Obviously, I'm not a fan of Romero Barella. She's probably going to be an underdog even against a short notice replacement. So if they do find one, I'll definitely put an update blurb in my article at fightnumbers.com once we do get any word on that. If not, though, it's just going to be 10 fights. So Ryan Hodge says, no more Twitch streams for me. Just going to focus on playing. Run good, dude, and Def will be betting some of your picks. All right, good to know. I know you're doing big things in the esports department. I'm not a big esports guy, but anybody else that is, go check out his Twitter. I think it's the esportsdepartment.com or something like that. But I know you guys have been crushing over there. All right, next fight up on the card is going to be Felipe Lins versus Tanner Boser. Felipe Lins, for those that remember, just back in February, he was 60% owned, and he just killed us against Andrei Arlovski. Basically just shit the bed real bad, super low volume, didn't do much, lost basically every round. And that's a big concern here because, when you look at Andrei Arlovski, the concern in that matchup with Arlovski was that Arlovski moves really well for a heavyweight. He might just be able to move around a lot and outpoint Lins. And that's sort of exactly what Tanner Boser does. Tanner Boser has made a living on being, even though he doesn't look as athletic as Arlovski, he kind of looks like this overweight, hillbilly sort of. And I don't even know if he is, but he has a curly mullet. But that's what he does. He moves around really, really well for his size. He throws a lot of leg kicks, has really strong leg kicks, and he just sort of dances around. And, he was an underdog when I broke down this fight. I'm picking him to win. Now he's actually moved to a slight favorite, -115. Felipe Lins, -105. So that's the second fight here in the first, 5 fights that the line has actually flipped on. But I think it's the right move because, like I said, Felipe Lins, we just can't trust him. And he only landed 41 significant strikes over the course of 3 rounds in the Arlovski fight. And that's really my biggest issue with him, is that he just waits too long to engage. And you see that with counter strikers, where I think he's skillful. It's just we need more volume, because if you don't land that big punch or do something significant, then you're probably getting outpointed, especially against a fighter like Tanner Boser, who's going to be spamming leg kicks. He's going to be landing in volume. So I just really think this one plays out pretty much the same way. And I know Felipe Lins hinted in an interview that he thinks he has a big advantage on the ground, and it's possible he could take the fight there, but it's kind of one of those things that I'll believe it when I see it type deal, because Lins is a black belt. He definitely does have the grappling advantage, but he had the grappling advantage against Arlovski, and he didn't even try to take him down at all. It was just it's just not something that I think he'll do. And Boser has yet to be taken down in either of his UFC fights. He's never been subbed in his career, and he has one hell of a chin. So I just really don't see... I'd be surprised here if Lins is able to get a finish, and I'd be very surprised if he's able to win rounds just based on volume alone, unless he's able to land takedowns, which, like I said, we just haven't seen people be able to do at this level versus Tanner Boser. So I just see this one playing out pretty much the same way. I'm on Tanner Boser here. If you got it on him early, then you got plus money. That was a sharp bet. Now he's a small favorite, but I still think it's probably the right play. So Tanner Boser by decision is the official pick in that one. All right, next fight up on the card is going to be Luis Violent Bob Ross Pena versus Kama Worthy. This one's going to be a fun one. I love Violent Bob Ross fights. He's like one of my, I have way too many favorite fighters, but he's definitely up there for me. I like his story, how he didn't know his family. He used, what is it called? The DNA swab, Ancestry.com. I don't know, one of those things. He used that, found his birth father, found a long lost brother that he hadn't been connected with. He just has a really cool story, and I just love his fighting style. He's very, like I mentioned, he's more of an exciting submission grappler, but his striking is always improving. He's very flowy. He's always constantly pumping the jab, sort of just to set up and get that range. And I'd be kind of surprised if he does that too long against Kama Worthy here. Pena is the big favorite, 260. The comeback on Worthy is plus 220. But I'd just be a little bit surprised if he tries to box the entire time against Worthy, because, Worthy's on a 6-fight win streak. Back-to-back wins have come by knockout. The only thing with Worthy is his last 5 losses have also been by knockout. So he's essentially the type of fighter that if he is unable to knock you out, then he's probably losing the fight, whether it's a decision or he's getting knocked out. And in this matchup, I think Luis Pena is going to threaten with takedowns. I think Worthy's takedown defense is going to be tested. Pena's landed a takedown in every single one of his UFC fights except his last one, and he's an aggressive submission grappler, like I mentioned. And when it comes to the striking, I think Pena's more technical. It's just Worthy's more powerful. So I think it's definitely going to be a more grappling based game plan from Pena, and I'm okay with taking shots on Worthy for the knockout upside, but Pena's never been finished. I don't think it's super likely that Worthy knocks him out, so I'm going to be definitely on the Pena side for this one. I have Pena winning by decision, and he does have a little bit of grappling upside for that price. We've seen Luis Pena in previous fights above that. He's usually above that 9K, and now he's only 8,900, so we do save a couple hundred, even though he is a big favorite. This is the first time, I believe. Yeah, first time he's ever been below 9K. And most of the time, he's like 92, 93. But he does score pretty well in his wins. You see the 120 against Matt Wyman, 117 against Richie Smolin. And obviously, he lost against Matt Frivola. That was kind of a questionable decision. But yeah, so I like the matchup for Pena. I'm on Luis Pena here. Pena by decision is the official pick in that one. All right, next fight up is going to be Maurice the Croquet Boss Green versus Jean Vellante. Green comes in as a minus 230 favorite. The comeback on Jean Vellante is plus 190. And this fight not to go to decision is minus 215. Opened at minus 165. So people definitely expecting a finish here. And I think they're expecting it on the Green side because look at the line movement on his inside distance. Opened at plus 105, already down to minus 123. I think that could even creep up to like minus 140 by the time Saturday rolls around. And I don't know how I feel about that. I do like Maurice Green in this matchup, but it's more because I just don't think Jean Vellante is very good. But, you know, Maurice Green's coming off the submission loss to Alexei Oleinik, and prior to that was knocked out by Sergey Pavlovich. That's a lot of respect in the betting markets for someone that was just finished in back-to-back fights. And, you know, the biggest win for Maurice Green is Junior Albini. So that's not really saying anything. And he should have some advantages in this matchup against Vellante. Vellante is coming off a knockout loss last year. And I just think Green's the more well-rounded striker. He'll have a 6-inch reach advantage in this matchup. And, you know, I mentioned the strong inside distance line at minus 123. So that makes him a pretty strong play just based on the numbers alone. He's only 8.6 on DraftKings. I do think, you know, a decision is probably more likely for Maurice Green, but he does have some decent finishing potential as well. And I'm just basically off of Jean Vellante altogether. So I like Maurice Green at 8,600. I'll have some, but it's like this range is like really tough for me. The upper 8K, low 9K range, because you have Mike Perry, Luis Pena, Woodson, Poirier, and Maurice Green. Like you can make a case for pretty much all of those guys. So that's this area right here between these 5 fighters or so. I think that's going to decide the slate this week. I really do. You know, whether you have 2 guys in that range, you know, I think it's going to be clear that you need to get that range correct in these fights. So I'm excited to see how it shakes out. But Maurice Green's a pretty strong play for me. Moving on to Brendan Allen versus Kyle Daukaus. I'm excited for this one. No surprise because my boy Brendan All-In Allen, love watching him fight. He comes in as a big 300 favorite. The comeback on Kyle Daukaus, the newcomer, plus 250. This fight not to go to decision is minus 245. And basically, you know, I think Allen has a good, minus 130, minus 145 now. More money coming in for Brendan Allen to win inside the distance. And I tend to agree, but there is more than sort of meets the eye in this one. You know, Allen's 2-0 in the UFC. He's got wins over Kevin Holland and a TKO victory over Tom Breese in February. And Kyle Daukaus is undefeated in his career and has won 8 of 9 wins by submission. The only one that went to decision was that Dana White Contender Series fight where he almost ended it by submission multiple times, but ended up getting a decision, didn't get signed by the UFC because of that, and then went on and finished his next 2 fights by submission. So now he gets a replacement fight. Ian Heinisch had to drop out and due to injury, and Kyle Daukaus is coming in on short notice here. Kyle Daukaus, a Philly guy, so shout out to him. But while the fight plays out on the feet, I think Daukaus should have an advantage. Just because, you know, Brendan Allen's not really a great striker. Both guys are southpaw. Brendan Allen's like really, you know, let's just say this, Rufus Sport is not known for their striking. And, you know, he's just sort of like upright and stiff. So, and we even saw it, you know, in some of his other fights where he usually, you know, gets punched in the mouth once or twice before he gets the fight to where he wants it, which is on the mat. So I could see that, you know, being a possibility here, that Daukaus might land something heavy, but Brendan Allen has never been knocked out. So it would have to be really heavy for me to worry about Brendan Allen here. And I think just at some point the fight does get to the mat, and Daukaus might even try to take it there because, like I said, 8 of his 9 wins have come by sub. He loves those exchanges as well. So, but the problem here is that Brendan Allen is just the better submission grappler. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's fought a much better competition up to this fight in their career. So I know he's a big favorite here, but it's kind of warranted. And, you know, I just see him being the better scrambler, the better grappler, and I think he has the better gas tank too. So I think we see some exciting grappling exchanges, but I'm going with my boy Allen here. I think he gets it done by submission. I'll have exposure to Daukaus, though, even though, I mentioned on Twitter, especially lately, ownership has always been important, right? Especially with MMA. But lately, with all eyes and all the money being pumped into the sport, we're seeing ownership on guys like Felipe Lins a couple months ago, but more recently, last week on Roshkov, he was like 60% owned, especially in the higher stakes stuff. And, that just didn't happen last year. Those type of fighters were like 30%, 35%. So if people are going to be that highly owned, then it just makes sense to take the other side, an overweight stance on the other side, even if you think it's unlikely they win. And that's sort of what I'm doing here, not because I think that Brendan Allen is going to be super chalk, because I don't think he will. He's the most expensive fighter on the slate at 9,200. But because I think that Daukaus has upside in that, like I said, he could land something heavy. But he also, even though I think Allen's the better grappler, it doesn't mean that Daukaus can't submit him. It's just unlikely. But if he does, he's going to score really well. And I just don't think anyone's really going to be on Kyle Daukaus, because Brendan Allen has fought at such a high level since coming into the UFC. So I'm going to be overweight on Daukaus, even though I think my guy Brendan Allen wins by sub. So just a little strategy thrown in there for me. Daukaus is going to be one of my heavier underdogs on the slate. He's the cheapest fighter on the slate. I think he's at 7K. Kyle Daukaus 7K, Brendan Allen 9,200. So Allen by subs, the official pick, but I'll definitely be heavier on the underdog in Daukaus. All right, up next, the co-main event, Mike Perry versus Mickey Gall. This one, has seen a lot of chatter for the wrong reasons, probably, because, Mike Perry recently, he's coming off the knockout loss to Jeff Neal in December, and prior to that, lost the split decision against Vicente Luque. I thought he won it, and basically he has sworn off coaches, training camp, gyms, all of that. He's sworn it all off and will only train with his girlfriend. She will coach him as well, girlfriend or fiance, whatever she is. And he wasn't kidding. Some people thought it was a smokescreen. He or she posted on Instagram the coach's corner badge that she has. So it is definitely legit. She is going to be in his corner coaching him through this fight. So we've seen some weird stuff with Diego Sanchez and his corner. But this is definitely going to be a first for me, seeing somebody's girlfriend or fiance be their coach and their only person in their corner. So the funny thing is, though, like it really shouldn't matter in this matchup. I mentioned he's a big favorite, 325 favorite, Mickey Gall, the underdog at 265. But, I don't think it matters, because Gall is just someone that I'm not impressed with whatsoever. He has, some pretty big cardio issues. He was knocked out just last year by Diego Sanchez, who doesn't really knock anyone out, especially at this stage in his career. So I just don't think Mickey Gall is at the level of Mike Perry, regardless of who is coaching Perry or what type of camp he's had. So it's no surprise that Mike Perry has one of the strongest inside distance line. Actually, I think it's the strongest right now at minus 180. And I really just don't have anything else to add in this matchup. I just think Perry goes in there, he gets the job done, and he wins by knockout. So at 9K on DraftKings, I think he's a pretty strong play. I mentioned that range. That's the range we're going to have to nail, that 86 to 9K range. And Mike Perry's definitely in the conversation, because I think the knockout is pretty likely here against Mickey Gall. All right, up next, the main event. We're actually flying through these fights. I know it's only been 10, so that helps, but usually we're at 45, 50, 55 minutes, something like that. We're only at like 35 minutes here, and we made it to the main event. So not a lot of questions either. You guys are sleeping. You guys are sleeping on a Wednesday. I make one bad call in Roshkov, and nobody wants to talk in the chat anymore. No, I'm just kidding. All right, the main event, Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. This one, I'm definitely pretty excited for, not because I think it's just going to be a fun fight, but because, coming into this fight, I think I was sort of looking at it and I'm like, well, Dan Hooker, he might be able to put up a fight. The more I dug into it, the more I just don't see Dan Hooker even keeping this one close. I see your question in the chat, Pepe Silva. I'll address that right after I finish the main event, and then I'll circle back if that's cool. And but yeah, Dustin Poirier, 220 favorite. The comeback on Dan Hangman Hooker is plus 180. But Poirier's coming off the title shot loss against Khabib last September, and I think he's going to be looking to make a statement here to get back in the conversation after Justin Gaethje basically leapfrogged him in line for getting the title shot. And with Conor McGregor supposedly retiring, it's just, I think Poirier is going to try to make a statement here to get himself back into that conversation. And Dan Hooker's coming off the action-packed decision victory over Paul Felder in February. And like I said, I'm all over Dustin Poirier in this matchup. I don't even really think it's up for debate. I just realistically, I think he has every advantage in this fight on the feet, and especially every advantage on the mat. I think Poirier is the more technical striker. I think he has more power. He lands in more volume than Dan Hooker. The only success that I could really see Dan Hooker having is by landing a bunch of leg kicks, which I expect to be his game plan. And he's usually decent at landing those leg kicks. We saw him do it against Paul Felder, and we saw Justin Gaethje have a lot of success against Dustin Poirier doing that same thing. So I'd be surprised if Dan Hooker didn't try to sort of implement that same game plan. But aside from that, like I said, I just think Poirier is better everywhere. And being that this is a 5-round fight, it only adds to my confidence in Dustin Poirier. He has much better cardio than Dan Hooker, and he's able to maintain a strong pace over the course of 25 minutes. He's just done it more times. He's had like 3 main events now. Dan Hooker just had 1 against Paul Felder, and we've seen in the past, even in 3-round fights, Dan Hooker, sort of struggle with the cardio. So I'm definitely on Poirier here for all those reasons. I just think there's levels to this, and Poirier is just at least one full level above Dan Hooker. I think Hooker's in over his head in this matchup, and I just think Poirier has more paths to victory, but I do think the knockout is the most likely, and I'll be betting that as well. Poirier by knockout is the official pick. He's one of the best overall plays on the slate on DraftKings, and I know the odds boost didn't come through for us. Curtis Blades just wanted to ragdoll and wrestle his opponent for 25 minutes, but FanDuel, going back to the well, they odds boosted Dustin Poirier up to plus 160 from plus 125 to win by knockout. So max bet is only 50, but I think it's definitely worth it because, like I said, I think that's the most likely scenario. So I like Dustin Poirier here for sure. And, like I said, in that same range, 8,700, very, very strong play. Look at all of his wins. Even the 5-round decision win over Max Holloway, he scored 124. Knocked out Eddie Alvarez, 107. Knocked out Justin Gaethje, 127. He submitted Anthony Pettis, 106. I mean, the guy just does it all. And when you look at Dan Hooker, it's just that I mentioned the levels. Look at these opponents for Dustin Poirier. He's not only beating the best of the best, but he's beating them at what they're good at. He went to war with Justin Gaethje. He knocked him out. He subbed Anthony Pettis, who's a great submission grappler. He knocked out Eddie Alvarez. He beat Max Holloway in a high-volume decision. The only thing he didn't do was beat Khabib in a wrestling match, and that's to be expected. But it's just like Dan Hooker, what did he do, really? He knocked out James Vick, who me or you can go knock out. And, he beat Paul Felder. That was impressive. That was a gutsy performance. Some people think Paul Felder won. I was pulling for Paul Felder. I think Dan Hooker did just slightly edge it out. But if the fight was one more round, Paul Felder might have finished him. So, I don't know. I just think Dustin Poirier is the much better fighter and has fought the better competition. So, I'm on Dustin Poirier for sure. Circling back, Pepe Silva asked if Zalil is going to be the chalk. I think he will. I mentioned the odds value. He's a slight favorite, opened up as a small underdog, and he's only 8K. So, and just, coupling that with the fact that Jordan Griffin is never popular. People don't really trust him. He lost, against Danny Ige, lost against Chaz Skelly. He was kind of low owned against TJ Brown. TJ Brown was a popular pick against Jordan Griffin. And even though Griffin did get the finish, he didn't score well. So it's not like people are going to be rushing to play Jordan Griffin. And now you're getting a guy who looked good in his debut against Austin Lingo and derailed the hype on Lingo and lands 6 takedowns. And Jordan Griffin doesn't really defend takedowns because he's comfortable on the mat as well. So he has takedown upside for sure. It's just, I don't know. I still lean Griffin for the reasons I mentioned, but I do think Zalil is going to be pretty chalky here. And he's not a bad play because if he does win, I think it comes through a couple takedowns, maybe a couple advances, and just being a little bit more active than Griffin on the feet in the striking exchange. But yeah, the pick for me is still Griffin. But good question, because I think that's going to be important. You know, when we talk about the leverage, you know, Zalil's going to be popular. I don't think Griffin is at $200 more, and I think Griffin's probably going to win. So from the subs, 7.7K, K Dime says sub 7.7K, will Kama Worthy be popular? I don't know if he'll be popular, but I do think he has upside. I guess, you know, with only 10 fights, that really factors in, because there's not really a ton of underdogs. You know, the last few slates, we've had a lot of people that had big upside. Jim Miller last week comes to mind in that range. You know, we really don't have that. I think Dan Hooker, just because he's the main event, he's going to soak up some ownership. But like I said, I don't think people are going to play Kyle Dawkins. The Barella fight was scrapped. I don't think people are going to be on Mickey Gall, with Perry being one of the most owned fighters. So I think Worthy is probably going to be a little bit popular. And that's kind of surprising, because Luis Pena is usually pretty popular. So I don't know. Maybe that gives us extra leverage playing Luis Pena, just because, you know, Poirier, Maurice Green, Mike Perry are all going to garner some ownership in that range. And if Worthy's the only real high upside underdog aside from Dan Hooker, then yeah, I think he could be pretty popular. So that's a good point that you bring up, K Dimes. I mentioned, you know, especially if it's 10 fights, that makes me even more so want to have an overweight stance on somebody like Kyle Dawkins, just because with 10 fights, everybody's going to be owned. Dawkins may very well be the only guy that's like 15%, somewhere in that range. I could see Worthy being like 30%. And again, that's if we still have the 10 fights. Obviously, depending on who the short notice replacement is for Barella, that could change some things. But at this stage, you know, Wednesday night, I do think Kama Worthy is going to be a popular underdog pick. Any other questions? Get them in the chat now. I'll wait for a few minutes here. I'll go ahead and upload this to YouTube once I'm done. Shout out to the YouTube listeners. I'm trying to get up to 100 YouTube subscribers. It is free, so definitely subscribe over there. I will post the article to fightnumbers.com. I'll also have DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. I'll have ownership projections. That's usually updated by Friday. And I'll also have a line movement page that's updated on fight night. Usually, around 1 or so on Saturday, just so you can see the line movement on each matchup. And I also have fantasy points per minute for every fighter in every weight division. So definitely go check all that stuff out. It's completely free. Any questions from now to fight time, hit me up at John Kelly DFS. I definitely appreciate it, guys. Thanks for joining, and I will see you guys next time. Good luck on Saturday. Oh, wait. Last minute question. Any cardio concerns with Hansen or Brahimaj? They both have looked gassed in previous fights against subpar competition. Yeah, I mentioned the concern, obviously coming off the Rashkov thing, that is a little bit of a concern for Brahimaj specifically, because a lot of his submission victories have come early. So it's definitely in the back of my mind. But again, I just keep going back to the fact that I think the most likely outcome is he does end it early, because Sato has problems giving up his back, and because he's just such a good submission grappler. Hansen, I worry less about. I think she's actually, I'm not sure which fight you're referring to. I know she looked pretty decent in her last fight. At least I thought she did. And she landed quite a few takedowns, had some good top control, and she was able to do that all 3 rounds. So I'm less concerned with her cardio than I am somebody like Brahimaj, but overall not super concerned with either of them because of the way that I see the fight playing out. But good question overall. Any other questions, guys, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at John Kelly DFS. Good luck on Saturday, and I will see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the Fight Numbers Podcast with John Kelly. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe.